I, 22 farads, am at a crossroads in my life, dealing with sudden loss and unexpected changes in my family. 3 months ago, my mom passed away unexpectedly, and before I could even begin to process my grief, my dad dropped a bombshell. He was getting remarried. It all started on what seemed like a normal Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for my classes at the local university, where I'm in my final year of studying psychology. My dad had already left for work, and I was about to head out when I realized I hadn't heard my mom moving around. She was usually an early riser, so this was unusual. I knocked on her bedroom door, but there was no answer. When I opened the door, I found her lying there, unresponsive. I called 911 immediately, but it was too late. The paramedics said it was likely a heart attack in her sleep. The loss of my mom hit me like a tidal wave. She wasn't just my mother, she was my best friend, my confidant, and my biggest cheerleader. I remember how she'd always been there for me, from the small moments to the big ones. She was the one who helped me through my first heartbreak in high school, staying up all night with me as I cried and reassuring me that things would get better. When I got accepted into the psychology program at university, she was over the moon, planning a special dinner to celebrate and telling everyone she knew about her daughter, the future psychologist. One of my fondest memories is of our weekly Sunday brunches. No matter how busy life got, we always made time for this tradition. We'd try out new recipes or go to little cafes, talking about everything and nothing. These moments seem so precious now, and I find myself wishing I had cherished them more when I had the chance. The next few weeks after her death were a blur of funeral arrangements, consoling relatives, and trying to keep myself together. My dad seemed to be coping better than I was, or so I thought. He threw himself into work, barely spending time at home. I was left to deal with my grief largely alone, trying to balance my studies with the overwhelming sense of loss. My university life, which had once been a source of excitement and purpose, now felt like a monumental struggle. I'd always been a good student, maintaining a high GPA with hopes of getting into a top-tier graduate program for clinical psychology. My dream was to become a therapist, to help people work through their traumas and find healing. Now, that dream felt distant and hazy, obscured by the fog of grief. I tried to throw myself into my studies, thinking that focusing on my goals would help me cope. But concentrating on lectures about human behavior and mental health felt painfully ironic when I was struggling so much with my own emotional state. My grades started to slip, and for the first time, I found myself questioning whether I was cut out for this field at all. Then, about a month after Mom's funeral, Dad came home with news that blindsided me. He introduced me to a woman he'd been seeing. Let's call her my stepmom. She was pleasant enough, smiling warmly and offering her condolences for my loss. But the real shock came when Dad announced they were getting married. In 2 weeks. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, are you serious? I remember asking, my voice shaking. Mom's only been gone for a month. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and determination. Life is short, sweetheart. We have to grab happiness when we can. Your mom would want me to move on. I wasn't so sure about that. Mom and Dad had been together for over 25 years. How could he move on so quickly? It felt like a betrayal, not just to Mom's memory, but to me as well. The wedding was a small, quiet affair. I attended out of obligation, but my heart wasn't in it. As I watched my dad exchange vows with this woman I barely knew, I felt like I was losing him too. To make matters more complicated, my stepmom has 2 kids of her own, a son who's 18 and a daughter who's 15. Suddenly, our quiet house was full of people, and I felt like an outsider in my own home. At first, my stepmom tried to win me over. She'd make my favorite meals, ask about my studies, and try to include me in family activities. But as the weeks went by and I remained distant, her attitude began to change. When my dad wasn't around, she'd make subtle digs at me. "Don't you think it's time you started contributing more to the household?" she'd say, even though I was juggling full-time studies with a part-time job. Or she'd comment on how I was always in my room, implying I was antisocial. Her kids weren't much better. The son mostly ignored me, but the daughter seemed to view me as competition for attention. She'd interrupt conversations I was having with my dad, or accidentally knock over my things. One particular incident stands out in my memory. I had been working on a crucial term paper for my abnormal psychology class, a subject I found fascinating and hoped to specialize in for my graduate studies. I had spent weeks researching and writing, and the paper was due the next day. I had left my laptop on the dining room table while I went to grab a quick dinner. When I returned, I found my stepsister using my laptop. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked up, annoyed. "Relax, I'm just checking my Instagram." My phone's dead. As I moved closer, I saw with horror that she had closed all my browser tabs and documents. "Did you save my work?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. She shrugged. "I don't know. It asked if I wanted to save something when I opened Chrome, but I just clicked no." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Weeks of work, potentially gone. I managed to recover most of it from autosaves, but I lost the last few hours of edits and had to stay up all night to redo them. When I tried to talk to my dad about it, he just said, "I'm sure she didn't mean any harm. You should be more careful with your things." One evening, about 2 months after the wedding, things came to a head. I was studying in the living room when my stepmom came in and turned on the TV, volume blaring. "Do you mind?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I'm trying to study for a big exam." She gave me a look that was almost triumphant. "This is a family space," she said. "If you want quiet, go to your room." I was about to argue when my dad walked in. I expected him to back me up, but instead, he said, "Your stepmom's right, honey. Why don't you take your books upstairs?" In that moment, I felt utterly alone. It was like my dad had chosen his new family over me. I gathered my things and retreated to my room, fighting back tears. The next day, I confided in my best friend about what was happening at home. She was shocked and suggested I consider moving out. "You're almost done with college," she pointed out. "Maybe it's time to get your own place." The idea was tempting, but it also scared me. I'd always imagined living at home until I finished my degree, saving money, and preparing for grad school. Plus, a part of me was afraid that if I left, I'd lose what little connection I still had with my dad. As the days went by, the tension in the house only grew. My stepmom became more openly hostile, making snide comments about my lifestyle, my choices, even the way I dressed. Her kids seemed to take this as permission to treat me poorly too. One morning, I came down to find that someone had spilled coffee all over my psychology textbook. When I confronted my stepsister, she just shrugged and said, "Oops, my bad. You shouldn't leave your stuff lying around." I tried to talk to my dad about what was happening, but he always seemed to have an excuse. "They're just adjusting," he'd say. Or, "I'm sure you're exaggerating a bit. Try to be more understanding." It felt like I was living in a house full of strangers, and the one person I thought I could count on, my dad, was slipping away from me. As my final semester of college approached, I found myself at a crossroads. Should I stick it out at home, hoping things would improve? Or was it time to strike out on my own, even if it meant struggling financially? The decision weighed heavily on me. On one hand, leaving felt like giving up on my relationship with my dad. On the other, staying meant enduring daily stress and conflict that was affecting my studies and my mental health. I thought about my mom, wondering what advice she would give me if she were here. She had always encouraged me to stand up for myself, but she had also valued family above all else. The thought of her made my heart ache anew. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my desk and made a pros/con list about moving out. As I wrote, I realized that the cons were mostly financial concerns and fear of the unknown. The pros, however, were all about my well-being and independence. I thought about my future plans. I had always dreamed of getting into a prestigious graduate program for clinical psychology. But with my grades slipping and my home life in chaos, that dream felt increasingly out of reach. If I stayed in this toxic environment, would I be sabotaging my own future? Just as I was considering how to broach the subject with my dad, another incident occurred that pushed me closer to a decision. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when my stepmom came in. She started criticizing the way I was cleaning up, saying I was making a mess. I tried to ignore her, but she kept pushing. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "if you can't even make a sandwich without creating chaos, how do you expect to survive on your own?" Something in me snapped. Maybe I'll manage better without people constantly criticizing my every move, I shot back. She looked shocked for a moment, then her face hardened. "Your father and I have been talking," she said. "We think it might be best if you started looking for your own place after graduation. You're an adult now, and it's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet." I was stunned. Before I could respond, my dad walked in. He must have overheard because he looked uncomfortable. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking, "is this true? Do you want me to move out?" He hesitated, then sighed. "We just think it might be for the best, sweetheart. Things have been tense, and maybe some space would do us all good." In that moment, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My own father was choosing his new wife over me. The home I'd grown up in, the place that held all my memories of my mom, was no longer mine. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and went back to my room. As I sat on my bed, surrounded by the remnants of my childhood, I realized that the decision had been made for me. It was time to move out. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at my dad for not standing up for me. Resentment towards my stepmom for pushing me out. Fear about what the future held. But underneath it all, a small part of me felt relieved. At least now I knew where I stood. I threw myself into apartment hunting, determined to find a place before graduation. My best friend offered to be my roommate, which eased some of my financial worries. We found a small, slightly run-down apartment not far from campus. It wasn't much, but it would be ours. As I packed up my room, sorting through years of memories, I came across a photo of my mom and me from my high school graduation. She was beaming with pride, her arm around my shoulders. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized how much had changed in just a few short years. I remembered how excited we had been that day, talking about my future and all the possibilities that lay ahead. Mom had always believed in me, always pushed me to follow my dreams. What would she think of me now, being pushed out of my own home? The day I moved out was bittersweet. My dad helped me carry boxes to my car, making awkward small talk about my new place. As we stood in the driveway, the last box loaded, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. "I'm sorry things turned out this way," he finally said, not quite meeting my eyes. I wanted to say so many things, that I was hurt, that I felt abandoned, that I missed the way things used to be. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Me too, Dad." He gave me a quick hug, and then I was driving away, watching my childhood home disappear in the rearview mirror. As I settled into my new apartment, I felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course, and a lingering anger at how things had turned out. But there was also a sense of freedom, of possibility. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. My relationship with my dad remained strained. We talked on the phone occasionally, but our conversations were superficial, neither of us quite knowing how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. As I approached graduation, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of changes that had occurred in my life. The loss of my mom, my dad's remarriage, the conflict with my stepmom and step-siblings, and now, living on my own. It had been a challenging year, to say the least. But as I looked ahead to the future, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had survived, I had adapted, and I had grown. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. Still, a part of me wondered if there was any chance of repairing my relationship with my dad. Could we ever get back to the close bond we once shared? Or had too much happened, too many hurts inflicted? As I prepared to don my cap and gown, these questions weighed heavily on my mind. Graduation was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration of achievement shared with family. But for me, it felt bittersweet, marked by the absence of my mom and the strained relationship with my dad. I couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter of my life bring? Could I find a way to balance my need for independence with my desire to maintain family connections? And most importantly, could I find peace with the new reality of my family situation? These questions lingered as I looked towards an uncertain future, hoping for resolution, but unsure of how to achieve it. The path ahead seemed daunting, but I knew I had to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Update 1. It's been a week since my last post, and things have taken an unexpected turn. My grandparents have gotten involved, and the situation has become more complicated. 3 days ago, my maternal grandmother called. She had just learned about my dad's remarriage and the issues I've been facing at home from a family friend. She was hurt that she hadn't been informed and worried about how I was coping. My grandmother reached out to my paternal grandparents, and they decided to intervene. They proposed a family meeting to address the issues and find a solution. I was hesitant but agreed, hoping that with their involvement, things might improve. The meeting was set for the next day at my paternal grandparents' houses. When I arrived, everyone was already there: my dad, stepmom, both sets of grandparents, and my aunt. The tension was palpable. My maternal grandmother started by expressing her disappointment in my dad's hasty remarriage. "How could you move on so quickly?" she asked. "And why weren't we informed?" My dad looked defensive. "I didn't think I needed permission to move on with my life," he said. "I was trying to do what was best for everyone." This sparked a debate about family obligations and respect for the deceased. My stepmom sat silently, looking uncomfortable. The focus then shifted to me. My paternal grandfather asked how I was coping with the changes. Before I could answer, my dad interjected, "She's an adult now. She needs to learn to adapt to changes in life." His words hit me hard. "Adapt?" I said, my voice rising. "Dad, you remarried barely a month after Mom died. You brought strangers into our home and expected me to just accept it. When I struggled, you took their side over mine," I continued, tears streaming down my face. "I lost my mom, and then I felt like I was losing my dad too. You chose your new family over me." My dad looked stunned, but quickly became defensive again. "You haven't exactly been easy to live with either. You've been cold to your stepmom and step-siblings from the start." The argument escalated, with my dad and I trading accusations and hurt feelings. The grandparents attempted to mediate, but the gap between us seemed too wide to bridge. After hours of discussion, my paternal grandmother proposed a temporary solution. "I think what everyone needs right now is some space," she said. "Why don't you come stay with us for a while?" she asked me. My maternal grandparents also offered their home. I was torn between wanting to escape the tension at home and feeling like I was being pushed out of my own family. My dad's reaction only reinforced this feeling. "Fine," he said coldly. if that's what you want. Maybe some time apart will help you appreciate what you have here." His words stung, widening the rift between us. I decided to stay with my mom's parents, thinking it was for the best. As I prepared to leave, my dad said, "I hope you know what you're doing. Family should stick together, not run away when things get tough." I replied tearfully, "I thought we were family, Dad. But it doesn't feel like that anymore." As I drove to my grandparents' house, I felt relieved but also deeply sad. The gulf between my dad and me seemed wider than ever. Now, I'm wondering what the future holds. Can this rift be healed, or has too much damage been done? I'm scared and unsure, but I know I need this time and space to figure things out. If anyone has been through something similar, I could use some advice. How do you rebuild a relationship when trust has been broken? Update 2. 2 weeks have passed since my last update, and significant changes have occurred. Living with my grandparents has provided time for reflection, but it's also brought unexpected developments. Following advice from many of you, I reached out to my dad last weekend, suggesting we meet for coffee. He agreed, and we met at a cafe downtown. When I saw him, I was struck by how tired he looked. After some awkward small talk, I finally asked, "Dad, what happened to us?" He sighed deeply. "I've been asking myself the same question. I never meant for things to get so out of hand." We had an emotional conversation, truly talking about our feelings for the first time since Mom died. Dad admitted rushing into the marriage with my stepmom partly to escape his pain. "I thought moving forward quickly would hurt less," he said, "but I only created more pain for everyone." I shared my feelings of loss and betrayal. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawning on his face. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I was so caught up in my own grief that I didn't see how much I was hurting you." We agreed to continue meeting regularly and to try family therapy once I felt ready. Before we left, Dad revealed that things weren't good with my stepmom. They'd been arguing a lot, especially about me. "She thinks I should have been firmer with you," he explained. Over the next week, Dad and I talked regularly by phone. Then, last night, he called with news. "We've decided to get a divorce." Dad explained they had a huge argument about me, Mom, and everything else. My stepmom accused him of still being in love with Mom's memory. "She's not entirely wrong," Dad admitted. "I do still love your mom. I always will." I rushed into things without fully processing my grief. He expressed regret about the hasty marriage and not being there for me. "I know this doesn't fix everything," he said, "but I'm committed to rebuilding our relationship. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't my priority." I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, hope, and anxiety about the future. Dad assured me he didn't expect any immediate decisions from me. "Take the time you need," he said. "We'll figure this out together." Now, I'm wondering about the next steps. I'm relieved we're communicating better, but I know we have a long road ahead. The divorce will bring new complications. I'm also thinking about my stepmom and step-siblings. Despite our difficulties, I never wanted to break up their family. I hope they'll be okay. As for me, I'm focusing on healing. I've started seeing a therapist, and I'm considering whether to continue with grad school plans or take some time off. Everything's in flux right now. If anyone has been through a similar situation, I'd appreciate advice on navigating these changes and balancing personal needs with family obligations. Thank you all again for your support. It means so much. Update 3. It's been 3 months since my last update, and a lot has changed. I'm finally seeing a path forward and want to thank everyone for their support during this challenging time. My relationship with Dad has been steadily improving. We've been meeting weekly for coffee or walks. These meetings were awkward at first, but we've found our rhythm over time. Dad's been seeing a therapist, which has helped him process his grief over Mom's death and his guilt about how he handled everything. During one of our walks, he admitted he never really dealt with losing mom. He's learning that it's okay to still love and miss her. This was both painful and healing to hear. It showed he was finally confronting the issues that had driven us apart. We've had some difficult conversations where I've expressed my hurt over feeling abandoned. Dad has listened without defensiveness and has apologized through both words and actions. He assured me that no one could replace mom or me in his heart, and that I'll always be his priority. These words have gone a long way in healing our rift. I'm excited to share that I've graduated from college. The ceremony was bittersweet, but Dad was there cheering me on. His words about how proud Mom would be meant the world to me. I've secured a position at a local nonprofit counseling families in crisis. I'll be working as an assistant to a senior counselor. I've decided to defer grad school for a year to focus on this job and continue healing. Dad was supportive of this decision. We're slowly finding a new normal. Dad has moved to a smaller apartment, and it's nice to have a space that's just ours. My relationship with my ex-step-siblings is still complicated, but my ex-stepsister and I have agreed to start fresh. I haven't had contact with my ex-stepmom, which I'm okay with for now. Unexpectedly, I've grown closer to Mom's side of the family. We often share memories of her, and I've reconnected with some of her old friends. Dad has been supportive of these connections. This journey has taught me about forgiveness and setting boundaries. I'm learning to forgive both Dad and myself, while also maintaining my independence. Looking ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic. My new job starts next week, and Dad and I have plans for a short beach trip, our first real one-on-one time in years. While nervous, I'm looking forward to it. We still have a long way to go, but I feel hopeful about our family's future. We're finding a new way to be a family that honors Mom's memory while moving forward. To anyone in a similar situation, know that healing is possible with effort and communication. Thank you all for your support. I may not update as frequently, but I'll check in if there are major developments. Update 4. It's been 3 years since my last update. I'm now 25, and life looks very different from when I first started posting about my family situation. My relationship with my dad has continued to improve. Our weekly coffee meetings have become a cherished tradition. Dad has continued with therapy, and it's made a world of difference. He's more open and more in tune with his emotions. One significant change is how we talk about Mom. Now, we can share memories of her with laughter and joy, alongside the inevitable sadness. Dad often says, "Your mom would have loved this," or "Remember how your mom used to." It's bittersweet, but it feels right. Career-wise, I've been promoted to a full-time counselor position at the nonprofit organization. I'm also set to graduate with my master's in counseling psychology next month. Dad has been incredibly supportive throughout this journey. Dad has become one of my biggest cheerleaders. Last year, when I presented at a small conference, he surprised me by showing up in the audience. Seeing him there, beaming with pride, nearly brought me to tears. Our relationship isn't perfect. We still have disagreements, but we've learned to communicate more effectively and approach conflicts with empathy and understanding. As for the rest of the family, things have settled. My ex-stepmom is no longer in the picture, and Dad hasn't dated anyone seriously since the divorce. My relationship with my former step-siblings is cordial, though not close. I've maintained my close relationship with my maternal grandparents and Mom's side of the family. Dad has been wonderful about this, often encouraging me to spend time with them and even joining us for some family events. I've been in a steady relationship for the past 2 years. My partner has fit in well with both Dad and my extended family. Looking back, I can see how far we've all come. The pain and anger that once dominated my life have faded, replaced by understanding and forgiveness. There are still tough days, but now I have a strong support system to lean on, including Dad. One significant change has been in how I view family. I've realized that family can take many forms. Our family may look different now, but it's no less valid or loving. Dad and I have established new traditions while honoring old ones. We still take our annual beach trip, now using it to reminisce about Mom and talk about our lives. Last year, we scattered some of Mom's ashes in her favorite spot on the beach. It was a poignant moment that brought us even closer. To anyone going through a similar situation, losing a parent, dealing with family upheaval, or trying to rebuild a damaged relationship, healing is possible. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But with patience, effort, and willingness to be vulnerable and forgive, relationships can be repaired and strengthened. 3 years ago, I couldn't imagine feeling truly happy or at peace with my family situation. Now, while I still miss Mom terribly, I can honestly say that I'm happy. I have a strong relationship with my dad, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace about my family. Thank you all for being part of this journey. This will likely be my last update, as our lives have settled into a new normal. I'll always be grateful for this community's support. To those still struggling with family issues, hang in there. Things can get better. Be patient with yourself and others, seek help when needed, and never give up hope for healing and reconciliation. Wishing you all the best.